Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome everyone back to another lively discussion on Aging Today. We are the podcast where together we explore the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today and our past 8 years, believe it or not, 8 years on the air. And all you got to do, if you want to go back and see some of our programs, all you got to do is go to our website, agingtoday.us, and you can see all of the over 500 episodes that we've recorded. Now, today is a very special day because this is our first video recording. We are graduating to YouTube, and so we're excited to be able to bring the visual to you, and hopefully I'm not going to scare too many of you away. So let's see where that goes. And then all of you that are following us on your favorite podcast channels, such as Spotify, Pandora, and there's about 15 others that we're on, and now YouTube. All you have to do is tune in and follow us on your favorite podcast channel. And then I also want to say thank you to the multitudes of people who have been tuning in over the years since 2017 that has made this show and continues to make this show. You are the ones why we're here, and we want you to know that we want to address all the questions that you're asking about the aging process, and it's your questions that initiate how and who the guests are that come on to Aging Today. But we also want to know some of your aging experts. If you have somebody that you would recommend to us, all you got to do is reach out to me, your host, Mark Turnbull, and my email is mark@agingtoday.us. It's Mark with a K, and it's mark@agingtoday.us. Well, we talk about a lot of different topics on this podcast, and it's all related to the aging process. And I always say that if you're not too busy being born, you're too busy aging. And aging happens whether you're 15 years or 115 years. I'm not sure anybody's alive today that's 115, but there may be somebody out there, and congratulations, you defied the laws of gravity. And so we definitely want to acknowledge all of you that are aging. But one thing that I know that is certain in life, and it's just a matter of time before all of us will begin to experience losses of something or someone in our lives. And when we experience loss, grief takes over.
If I'd been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests, while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
And here to guide us today through the process of grieving and the grief process is our guide, and she's an incredible author. She's an incredible human being. Her name is Missy Buchanan. Missy, welcome to Aging Today.
It is so great to be back with you, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah. And we have had you on in the past. And for our listening audience, the topic that we discussed was, you remember what it was?
The best that I remember.
I'm trying to remember what it was. It was so long ago.
I think it was about faithful aging and the challenges of aging, and how we look at aging as not something to be dreaded, but more of an adventure, and what we can do to prepare for it. Yeah.
Absolutely. But today we're going to be talking about your new book, and I'm excited to learn more about that. I did have the opportunity to read it, and I was very impressed with the approach and the style in which you write. And but before we do that, before we get into your book, I always start out with all of my guests, and I know you've been a guest in the past, But for those that are tuning in for the first time, I want them to hear a little bit of your story. What's in your story? And how did you get to this place where you are a well-known author and a well-known speaker?
Well, I write on faithful aging, and that all came about as I was being a caregiver for my own aging parents. And I realized as I would interact with them at their senior living community, how different residents would say one to the other, "How you doing today?" And the answer was often, "I'm just here. I'm just here." And that really broke my heart because, that just, it made it sound like they were just waiting to die. And I thought, that's not, number one, as a person of faith, I don't think that's how God intends for us to live out our last years, that we have purpose. And so I began to write actually for my own parents, just writing little devotionals, something that they could read very quickly because I didn't find anything out there that was written in their heart language, I call it. And so I just began to write for them, and the first book was called Living with Purpose in a Worn Out Body. And it's just been one after another, and now I get to speak to so many different senior living communities and church groups and aging conferences, and it's just been an amazing ride that I never anticipated. But this last book came about, it was the one I never intended to write. A book on grief was something that I never wanted to write, number one, but I also had thought to myself, there's so many books on grief out there that they didn't need another book. But I found that when my husband died, it's been a year ago, he died in April of 2023. And what I realized as I brought out all these books that I already had on my shelves, I had at least a dozen, and I began to go through them, and one by one, they either felt like a textbook, like it was too academic, and it had homework, and I didn't want to do homework, or they were just cliches and things like that. And I'm sure at a different point in my life, the information would have been very, very helpful. But in that moment, I was looking for something that spoke to my heart, my broken heart. And when I couldn't find it, I just began to write little snippets as if I was talking to him. And I began to post every once in a while something like that on Facebook. And then, oh my goodness, the response that I got from people that would private message me and say, "Oh, this is exactly how I felt." Even though their circumstances were different, the feelings were the same. And so when my publisher, Upper Room, we talked, and I said, I think maybe I will do a book on grief, but it's not going to be something that's a 1, 2, 3 step-by-step process or whatever. It's just all about getting in touch with those feelings. And so that's where the book, Feeling Your Way Through Grief, that's how it came to be.
Now in your book, I think you described that there's 3 sections to the book, and describe in a little more detail what your intentions were with those 3 sections.
Well, actually, the publisher chose to put them in that order, and I had not really thought about it, but they wanted to do something where there were more ordinary, just those little things that happen that just catch you off guard, just the doorknob. I opened the door trying to go outside, and the door handle comes off in my hand, and I'm like, now what do I do? And just those little things, or the smell of soap, just all those little things that just catch you by surprise. But then there are those things that we can plan for, things like, holidays and celebrations and, anniversaries and birthdays and whatever. And for those events, you have an opportunity to think about, how do I want to spend that birthday? I remember coming up on Barry's the birthday after his death, and thinking, okay, now what do I want to do? And my kids were great, and they were like, "Mom, we can come be with you. What do you want to do?" And I finally told him, I said, I think I just want to stay home and stay mostly in my pajamas, and I'm going to fix pecan waffles that were his favorite and his favorite bacon, and I was going to watch Top Gun, which was his favorite movie, and I was going to cry and laugh through it, and that's what I did. And so for Christmas and things like that, it doesn't mean it's going to turn out exactly as you thought, but you do have an advance notice and thinking about how am I going to approach this. And that's very different than those things that just happen spontaneously.
Yeah. And I think a really good place for us to go back to, just to kind of rewind a little bit, is help our listening audience, as you were experiencing this journey with the loss of your husband. And again, I don't want this to be about the definitions of grief, but in your mind, what is grief? And so I think that would be helpful to many people out there as they experience loss.
Yeah, I think grief is as individual as our fingerprints, but I think grief is love. I don't think you grieve deeply if you didn't love deeply. And it's that sense of that life is just taking a total different direction than what you want. It's looking out and thinking broken dreams and things you're not going to get to do together. And so it can bring this profound loneliness and sadness and disappointment, all those things rolled up. But I think the essence of it is love.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And one of the things that I've been doing a lot of research and study myself, because I speak on grief in particular, and it's something that is deep inside of us when we experience that loss. It's the deep, the anguish, the feelings that of experiencing a particular loss, whether that's thoughts and beliefs and all of those things, they live in the body. And one of the things that you mentioned is the bubbling up. And I think that people need to understand that when you have a significant loss in your life, that grief never goes away. It is laying there. It's lying there waiting to surface, and it has to have a release valve. I look at it like a release valve, or like a geyser, like Old Faithful. Sometimes it's just violent in its release, and sometimes it's very calm. But one of the things, as I looked at that definition and how I see grief and how it manifests itself, I saw that in your book. And I don't know if that was intentional, but each chapter there was a trigger that inspired you to write.
Oh, absolutely.
Which you were eloquently, describing there just a little while ago.
Well, I said it was the hardest, easiest book that I've ever written. It was easy because, my goodness, it was written in real time, and so these were things I was experiencing, just as you were describing. And you were talking about the bubbling up thing, and I think that's so true. Just yesterday, a prime example. I've moved and built a little 2-bedroom cottage down in the hill country of Texas to be nearer my son. And I had decided this about a year ago, that if I could find the right place and whatever, because I have one daughter that's in California, one that's in Ireland, and then my son who's in the hill country. And so I was, at least 4 hours away. And I thought I need to be closer to them. So I built this little cottage, and it's been great and whatever. And so that meant leaving behind a church and friends that I'd had for 43 years. And that was hard. And that's a different kind of grief, just as you were explaining, because we don't just grieve the loss of people through death. We grieve over things we leave behind and friends we leave behind and whatever. But I knew I wanted to do this. And so yesterday was the day that I chose to join a new church. And after 43 years in my own church back in Rockwall, and I knew that it was going to be hard, and it's been over a year since Barry died, but still to go up by myself and stand in front of the church and whatever, I just had tears in my eyes, and luckily the minister knew what was going on, and so as soon as the service is over, she pulls out the Kleenexes for me, which I appreciated. But it's like, yes, those things still bubble up. It can be a song. I can be, if Blueberry Hill was one of his favorites, and that comes on the radio or on something that I'm listening to and whatever.
Yeah,
and here it comes. It just comes.
I think that, and I think that's a great example in sharing. Thank you for sharing that, because, when you've experienced that loss, there's a sacredness to that, and sometimes we get the guilt, shame, and the judgment that runs through and say, well, I can't change, I can't do anything else, I can't do anything new, I can't have any new relationships because of, maybe those things are bubbling up inside of you. And I think that, there's a balance there of give yourself that time to, let hang on to some of those things, but there's going to be that time when you have to move forward. How did you know that it was that time for you to move forward and begin to relinquish or let loose some of these things, like just even choosing a church?
I think a lot of it, and I look at grief as being a companion. It's a companion that's with us, and it's intertwined with life. And it always will be for me from this point on, and I totally get that. I've tried to be proactive in thinking what I wanted my children, my adult children, to take away. I did not want for them, let's say that I were to become ill or whatever, I didn't want them to have to stop their lives to come up and take care of me and whatever. It's like I wanted, while I was still able, I wanted to make that move, knowing that it was going to be hard, but I just knew in my gut that it was the right thing to do. And so I think by wrestling with all those emotions and by giving myself permission to feel all those feelings, whether it's anger or sadness or loneliness or whatever it is, I have given myself permission to feel them and not be ashamed of them. Because I've heard too many, actually a lot of older adults that they will say things like, well, you got to have a stiff upper lip. And I'm like, no, you don't. I don't think that's what life is about, having a stiff upper lip. Mm-hmm. It's okay that I stood in front of that church and had tears rolling down my face. It's okay. Because I think it's in that vulnerability that we are strong. And it's when I allow others to see, yeah, this hurts, but I'm doing it anyway, that's where I get my courage. And so I think and I try to think of it as, how can I model this for my adult children? That's been real important to me.
Yeah. I love that word that you use, that grief is your companion. And I think that that's pretty accurate from what I've experienced in my own life, and then as I've experienced that through other people's life, is that if we allow grief to be our companion, or I call it our teacher, there's many, many things that we can learn about ourselves as we work through some of the losses and some of the grief that we're experiencing. And there's no doubt about it. Grief is complex. And I call it an inside job. It's inside of us. And I think also one of the things that I've acknowledged about grief is that it doesn't need to control us, but it will always be with us. And there's a big difference there.
Oh, totally.
How do you see that?
Oh, I totally agree. It's like I am very aware of it. This morning I went out on the back porch. It was the first day that I really felt cool enough just to go out and have my coffee, and it was like I was sad, but at the same time there was a sense of hope and looking forward. And I've learned to get comfortable with that. I've also learned that it's when I face those really hard feelings, and I write about this in the book, about the first time that I listened to voicemails that Barry had left on my phone, a few months before he died. And I went back to listen to them, and I had dreaded it. I had really dreaded it because I didn't know what they were going to say, but I knew just hearing his voice was going to trigger. But it's like, no, I want to do this. I really need to do this. And the first one, he says something to the effect of, he said, I just called to hear your voice. I just needed to hear your voice. Well, I just lost it. I just lost it because I thought I'm not ever going to hear his voice again in this lifetime. And so I just sobbed. I just sobbed and sobbed. But what was interesting was that I came out on the other side of that feeling lighter and brighter. And so I think it's when we face, instead of try to run from those feelings, when we just lean into them, knowing that it's going to be hard, I think that's when we can really take grief as our companion and walk through the rest of life. And at least that's what I'm planning on doing.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of value in that too, just hearing somebody's voice. I'm often, when music plays that role in our lives. And, when you think about your life story, at least I do for myself, that there's specific types of music in my past. And when I'm going through a loss, there may be a music that, can identify with that loss, a memory with that person back in time. And when I hear that music, it's actually can be sorrowful, but then it turns into fond memories that begin to trigger. And that's what I love about your book, is that you take the trigger points that you've experienced in your life, and then you wrote them down for all of us to be able to feel those things, like the rocking chair is the very first one. Describe what happened in that moment that inspired you to write about the rocking chair.
The rocking chairs, we lived in a wonderful neighborhood where we had downsized to, and had just a sweet, small cottage and whatever, and we had 2 rocking chairs out there, and we had been living there since all the kids had grown and were off and about, and life was simple and it was wonderful. And then we often would go out and sit on in the evening and wave at the neighbors and whatever. But during COVID particularly, that became our little respite, because it was like you could go out in the world but be safe at the same time. And we could talk to neighbors who were passing by and whatever. And, they're out walking their dogs, and just, it was just this wonderful place. We could FaceTime with the grandkids and whatever, but we'd sit in those 2 rockers. And so after Barry died, it was like, that became that was hard to even think about wanting to go out and sit in those rocking chairs on the porch, because that was something we just did together. We just sit out there and talk all the time. And then it was, you realized you're not going to have that person to talk with anymore. You're on your own. And that was really hard. It was like, I left that particular one in questions like, will I go back out there, or will I not? I don't know, because I don't think there's a wrong answer. It wouldn't have been wrong if I didn't. I did eventually go back out, but it was not until I was ready to do so. And I think there again, everybody has their own stories, and it may not be rocking chairs for somebody else. It would be, but I think it triggers something that they can go, oh, that's like, for me, blah, 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 And that was the goal, I think, in writing it, was that I know you're not going to have the very same experiences that I had, but I think that it will trigger things with you and prompt you to think about something that you can go, oh, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Did you know grief is a universal consequence of a significant life loss? If you're a human living on planet Earth, then you know loss happens. Loss is a part of life. Nothing can prepare us for the death of a loved one, and nothing is ever the same after. Grief can bring on pain, isolation, and confusion, and grief is a normal and natural response to loss. It lives on in our bodies, and keeping grief inside only increases the pain. So how do you ever begin to live life after loss? With new awareness, you can discover how curiosity and self-care can be lifelines to radiant living and take your life back from grief's grip. With grief as your teacher, it is possible to move beyond your grief. If you are feeling overwhelmed in your grief, there are numerous resources available to assist you in your grief journey. Reach out to Aging Today, and we can assist you in connecting with the many grief resources that are within your reach. This Did You Know moment was brought to you today by Royal Hospice of Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other chapters that struck me was Tell Me a Story, the chapter on Tell Me a Story. And my wife will often say when she has a hard time sleeping at night, she says, "Tell me a story." And as soon as I start talking, she falls asleep. That's how engaging I am as a communicator. but explain that story, because I think it was very similar, not the same, but similar.
That just as you described, we had this little thing. If I was awake and whatever, and I would say, "Tell me a story," and I'd do it in this silly, kid-like voice and whatever, and he would go, "Well, what do you want to hear about?" And I'd say, "Well, tell me about when you were a kid and did such and such," or tell me, whatever. And then, toward the end of that little piece and whatever, it's like I realized, I didn't hear all of his stories. And that makes me sad, because I'm sure there were stories that I never thought about asking about. And some of the stories I heard over and over, and I didn't care. It was just a little fun thing that we did between the two of us, but it was part of our routine. And that just made it special. And those are the hard things, those little silly things in most people's minds. But yet when it's your life, it takes on a whole different meaning.
Yeah, and I'm sure with the passing of Barry, I'm certain that probably what you experienced was deep, deep anguish, and you've had to work through that. How many years has it been?
He died in April of 2023, so it's just been close to a year and a half now.
Just a year. And my question to you is, as all of us, when we experience losses in our lives, and the closer we are to someone or something, and we experience that loss, I'm sure that we'll all go through that deep, deep anguish. And I think that one of the things that I want everybody to know, that grief is not a life sentence, meaning that you're not going to be stuck there. Hopefully you're not going to be stuck there forever. Yet that grief will always remain with us. How has the grief in a year's time evolved for you? And I'm certain that it'll continue to evolve as long as we take the responsibility as human beings to manage that grief. How has it changed for you?
Yes, it has changed, and it's lessened in some ways. It's like, there were, particularly probably the first 6 months to a year, it's like I don't think there was a day that went by that I didn't cry. There'd just be something that would trigger tears, and they might not last long, or it might, and I just kind of got used to that. And I've realized that, particularly as I've kind of, made transition to a new house and whatever, and I feel more comfortable in handling all the finances and things like that I hadn't done before. I'm feeling that sense of responsibility and whatever. But with each step that I take, it's not that it goes away, because it definitely does not, just like it did not yesterday. But you learn that number one, it's not going to last as long. That moment of just anguish and whatever, just like yesterday joining the church. I mean, I literally went to the car and just wept. But then I came home and it was like, okay, now I'm ready for lunch, And so it's been interesting to see how that's, it's not, I know that I'm not going to stay there. And that's what I tell the kids, my adult children and whatever. They know that when I tell them I'm going to have a raw day, there's just something that I know that's, coming up or that I'm feeling it. And if it's a day that I don't want to talk, or FaceTime or whatever, I'll just say, today's a raw day. And that signals to them, I think, that it's, mom's going to be okay. She's going to be sad today, but it's okay. And I think it gives them permission to do the same because they're grieving too, just, differently. But, I think that it's like, you know that it's there and it doesn't go away, but the weight is not as heavy. I think that's probably the best way that I can describe it.
Yeah. And you have to look at it, another way to look at it too is each year that goes by, you'll never forget the loss of Barry. You'll never forget the touch, the special touch that he's had on your life. Even as you go on in other relationships. And I think that's one of the fears that many people have is the fear of losing touch with the special touch that person brought into their lives. And I don't think that's true because there's all kinds of, like you write in your book, there's all kinds of things that happen during the day that trigger memories of our loved ones.
Totally. And, for me, I think it's been a lot about maintaining purpose. I probably took off about 6 weeks, 2 months maybe before, canceling speaking events that I had done were on my calendar and whatever and things like that. And then I hopped back into it. Knowing it was going to be hard. And I remember the first group that I spoke to after he died, I told them before I even started, I said, okay, there's going to come a point in here that I'm probably going to cry and I'm just going to give y'all a heads up. And they were so sweet and so supportive and whatever. But it was like I needed to get back into the rhythm of things that are important to me, which is, speaking to older adult groups and writing and doing all those things, and I travel to speak. And it's like, yes, that was hard because I was so used to him. Most of the time he would travel with me. And so now I was traveling alone and it wasn't nearly as much fun, but I had a reason to do it. And I know that's continuing to propel me forward. And so to me, that's real important, is not to lose sight of whatever that purpose is that we have. Purpose being a grandmother and whatever, moving down here, I'm closer to 3 of my 4 grandchildren and able to participate in more of their daily lives than I was before. Well, that's a blessing. And so, I have to always stop and think about, yes, I gave up 43 years of friendships there, but on the other hand, I'm also getting an opportunity to be with my grandchildren more, and that's huge. So yeah, it's constantly just reflecting on those things, I think.
And life has to move forward.
It does. And I am a firm believer in that.
Yeah, life has to move forward. And
and I don't want to get stuck.
And that's not being disrespectful.
No. My husband have been the first to say that. I think he would be very proud and not wanting me to be stuck. And so that's what I've tried to do. Yeah, and it's really sad to see somebody that is stuck in their grief and they haven't been able to move forward. And if you came across somebody like that was stuck in their grief, how would you counsel them? What would you say? Well, that's hard. It's hard without really knowing them and whatever.
And it's probably would vary.
I do think that's true. And I think people are often stuck because they are not willing to be in touch with their emotions. I think the more we are less likely to be stuck if we're willing to lean into all of those and to say, okay, I'm going to be really sad today, or they want me to do such and such for Christmas and I just don't want to do that, and whatever. That's okay. I think the people that tend to get stuck are those that are kind of in denial and just never really wrestle with those emotions. And I think kind of like I was saying, that when you lean into those really hard things, you come out on the other side feeling lighter and brighter. And so I think that's the message that I would try to share with someone who seems to be stuck. And on the other hand, everybody grieves at their own pace. And so I don't want to put a timeline on anybody's grief, because I think that's not fair either. Mm-hmm. So, encouraging them to wrestle with those emotions, and at this, same time, take that little mini step forward. Sometimes that's all we can do, is just take that very small step.
Yeah. One of the things that I know about grief in my own personal life, and just as I talk with many, many people out there, is that grief lives in our bodies. And that's an interesting way to look at it. And what I mean by living in our bodies is that it lives in our brains, it lives in our heart. I mean, I know people, my grandfather being one, who, when my grandmother died, my grandfather was a tough old logger, and he died of a broken heart. And I don't think, and I really truly believe that. I mean, he was one strong dude, and when he lost the love of his life, he lost his purpose for living in some respects. So grief lives in our brains, it lives in our hearts, it lives in our tears, it lives in our immune system. I mean, if you don't take care of that grief, you can really wear your body down, and then you're susceptible to all kinds of other infections and things like that. It can affect our appetite, it can affect our sleep. I mean, there's so many ways that grief affects and lives inside of our body. For you in particular, if we can get personal here, how did, if you were to look at those categories I just brought to you, which one affected you the most?
I think I've tried to be very cognizant about eating well. It would have been very easy to just not care and very easy not to exercise. I mean, to be real honest, because it's, I think you feel like you have an excuse, and I'm not to say that I do it well all the time. I don't, but I tried to be very deliberate with eating alone is just yucky. I mean, it's just not very much fun. Cooking, for one, is not much fun. But I do try to find, it's like, okay, our local grocery store here has wonderful little simple meals of salmon already done up for you, and all you got to do is pop it in. It's like, that's what I'll do. But I try to choose well, and I try to get up in the mornings and do my walking and then chair yoga and whatever, just because I know I need to, and I want to be as healthy as I can be, as number one, just to take care of myself, but also because I travel and I speak, and I've got to keep up my energy in order to do that. So that's been real important. On the other hand, I think that it's also like I give myself permission just to be sometimes. It's like I love having a day where I have no responsibilities, and I just give myself permission just to, I can just watch a Hallmark movie or whatever I want to do, and just rest.
Yeah.
And just rest. And I think that's important. Yeah, I don't. Other than that, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I think you're right about that. Yeah, no, I think that does, and I think it again, it's so different for everybody. Everybody approaches it differently, but it's going to affect us, and it lives inside of our bodies. I think that's the principle, and the principle is okay. So the solution to the principle is, how do you address that? And one of the things that you said so clearly was being deliberate. and keeping your life moving forward. I mean, one of the things that you have that maybe not everybody has is that structure of being in front of groups and speaking and writing and doing all those things. But it doesn't matter because everybody has something in their life that they can be deliberate with.
I think that's true. And that's being that intentional, whether it's volunteering somewhere. It doesn't mean you have to do it every day, but just having one day a week where somebody's counting on you to do something, it kind of puts a little pep in your step, and I think that's hugely important. But we do have to be intentional about that. I've seen people kind of go another route in which they overschedule, just trying to fill their time. And I don't think that's very helpful either, to just fill your days with so many things just so you don't have to think about being alone or what that grief feels like or whatever. So I think in all of that, it's about a balance, It's being intentional on one hand, and then on the other hand, giving yourself permission just to rest at however works for you. I just think both of those things together is what makes it work. At least it does for me.
Yeah, and when those times when the bubbling does occur, whether it's a gentle bubble or a violent bubble, we can't live in this world of guilt, shame, and judgment. When those times happen, just let them go, because it's a relief valve. It's like, I remember watching my mom, she did a lot of canning back in the day, right? And so there's that little valve, that release valve on top of the pot, when it gets too much pressure in there, it releases that steam. And you have to think of it that same way, is as we experience our grief and as it lives inside of our bodies, we all need that relief valve, whatever that may be.
Right. And to get past that notion of stiff upper lip thing and, I've got to be almost stoic and whatever. And so, that's the message I really try to share with people, is like, give yourself permission to cry, give yourself permission to be angry, give yourself permission to, whatever those emotions are, just feel them. And that's the title of the book, Feeling Your Way Through Grief. It's not about thinking it through. It's not about, doing your homework through it and whatever. Those things all have their place and time. But this is just to get in touch with those feelings and say, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. If that means you got to wear waterproof mascara when you go out, wear waterproof mascara if you're worried about having it run down your face. So, whatever it takes, just to say it's okay to feel any of those things. My brother, he lost his wife just like 3 weeks after Barry died. And he said that he would get wary of people coming to him and saying, "How are you doing?" And he said, "I know they're well-intentioned, whatever. You just get tired of answering it, And he said now he answers, "I'm okay until I'm not." And I told him, I said, "That's terrific. That's such a great way of saying it. I'm okay until I'm not." And so just having, a common phrase like that to say to somebody and whatever, instead of trying to launch into, all the things that you're feeling or doing or whatever, just a simple answer, "I'm okay until I'm not," period.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your book is broken down into the 3 parts. It's the snapshots of, kind of those trigger, I call them the trigger points that happened in your life, that you began to write those things down, and we all experience them. That's why your book is so relatable. And then you had the everyday grief in section number 2, and then in section number 3 you have grief through the year. And I want to take a little bit of time because in talking about that 3rd section, because I think it's a very important section because you're addressing the holidays, the trigger points that happen in the holidays, and a lot of people avoid the holidays because it does trigger loss, and in many ways. And so I'd like you to just kind of address that section and how you approach that when those triggers came up and the grief began to bubble up inside of you.
Yeah. There again, it's like those are the times that you can think about in advance. Thanksgiving's coming. And so you're already thinking, what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing we've done every year. Do we do that thing that some of the grief support groups will say, set the empty place at the table? And it's like, that didn't work for me, but maybe that works for someone else. But just to start thinking about it instead of just, not thinking about it, because I think you can begin to make a plan as to what do you, how do you want to spend Thanksgiving? If this is a year that you want to just uproot and go somewhere else totally, then do it. Just do it. For me, it was capturing those moments, and the things that I didn't really anticipate were like the Thanksgiving turkey dinner at church, and then it's on the screen about bringing your Thanksgiving turkey dinners, which we collected every year. And I'm thinking, why is this? Why am I crying? Why am I crying over Thanksgiving turkey dinners and all? And then, of course, it came about because Barry and I would do that every year. We'd go shop for the family. These were turkey dinners given to underserved families in the Dallas area, and so. Is something we had done together for years and years. And so when I saw that on the screen, it just made me weep. And so then it was like, okay, what do I do now? Is this going to be the year that I go on and go buy all the things and that's going to be really hard? Or is it the year that I just skip it all together? And so what I ended up doing was, I wrote a check to the church because they said they could use cash as well. And I thought, okay, for this year, I'm just going to write a check. Now, next year, I may do something different, and that would be this coming Thanksgiving. And I probably will go back to doing the Thanksgiving turkey. But it's like those, just having the opportunity to try to think through it. Like, what are the traditions in your family? Like for us, it was going to be Christmas Eve, and knowing as soon as I heard Silent Night and everybody's holding up their candles, I thought, I'm just going to lose it. I know I am, and I did. And but it's okay. It's okay. So I think it's just important to know that there's not, what you do this year doesn't have to mean that it's going to be that way forever. But it's how do you want to proceed? How do you think you want to proceed with it this year? And make that plan. And then if it's, if you cry through it, okay, it's just okay. And that then another year will come by and you can take a different tack. But to try to, sometimes I think we try so hard to keep everything as it once was that we end up being miserable. And I didn't want to do that either. So while we kept traditions and whatever, I remember my daughter, she wanted to make sure that we had Barry's stocking up, because we had everybody's stockings that we hang over the fireplace. And that was real important to her, that it stay up there. And I said, we will put it up. And we did. But it's for every family, for every individual, that's going to be different. There is no particular right way. But just, I think to think through it as best you can, and then know you're going to get through it this year, and then next year you have a different opportunity. So, no right or wrong on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I really appreciated about your book was the love that you had for Barry. And it came through very strong, powerful, in a powerful way. And it reminded me of one of the things I enjoy doing, and this sounds really morbid. I enjoy going to cemeteries. And the reason why I go is because I enjoy seeing the epitaphs that people put on their tombstones. And because it tells you a story. And I'm all about the story, and I'm fascinated by the myriad of people that have lived on this planet, from day one to where we are today. And everybody's got a story. And there's one cemetery in Eastern Oregon, in an old windswept cemetery. There's a tombstone. And on that tombstone, She writes, "He's gone, and oh, how I miss him." And that's probably my favorite epitaph. And as I was reading your book, I probably, if I can interject and speak for you, that's your story. Barry's gone, and oh, how you miss him, and it comes out strong in this book.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Am
that.
I correct in that?
Oh, you are absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct. We were married, we were a team, but we really were also best friends, and we just had a great time. And I tell you what, when Reverend Adam Hamilton wrote an endorsement for the book, and he sent the endorsement, but then he sent a private message too, and he was saying that it made him cry in certain parts and whatever, because he was reflecting on his relationship with his wife. And he, and I thought, that's something that I hope younger people would read it and think, some of these things that we think are important really aren't. I mean, cherish the time that you have together, laugh together, love together. That's what's important. It's we get hung up on too many silly things and whatever, but I'm glad that did shine through, because that's the way it was. And that's again, the deeper we love, the deeper we're going to grieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're running out of time, and I just want to say, Missy, what a delight, what a pleasure to have you on Aging Today to tell your story, the story of the loss of your husband and the loss that's in your life, and being so transparent for the rest of us, because I want everybody to know that this is not it's not an academic book. It's not a definition of what is grief. It's a book that I think your title says it well, feeling your way through grief. And it's all the trigger points that happen when we do experience a loss, and how you responded to those triggers that we're all going to have when we have a loss. And I just want to say thank you for writing this book for all of us.
Oh, you are very welcome. And I do hope that others will read it and find that sense of companionship. I want them to know you're not alone. You're not alone on this journey. It feels like you're alone, totally. But other people, I think about the friends that I have that have helped me the most, have been the ones that have just been that quiet and steady presence. And they'll, from time to time, say, "Do you want to do anything together today?" Or they'll understand if I say no. And that's what a huge blessing that is. And so I hope that the book in some way will be that source of comfort for others that are on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the book is Feeling Your Way Through Grief by Missy Buchanan. And you can pick it up at your Amazon. Is it on Amazon?
Oh,
Is
yes.
Where do you
Amazon,
find the best place?
Amazon, Christian Book, Upper Room Books. Yeah. Almost any online presence for sure.
Yeah. And then also one more thing before we leave. You also were interviewed on the Good Morning America.
Good Morning America with Robin Roberts.
Did I get the right show?
You
I don't
did.
watch that.
Yes.
Shows, but...
Good Morning America with Robin Roberts.
Yeah.
She interviewed me.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you want to hear that interview or that story, do you have that posted on your website?
I don't think it is, but you can probably Google it. It was August 1st of this year, and so just Google, Good Morning America, August 1st, Missy Buchanan, Robin Roberts. It'll pop up, I bet.
Fantastic. Missy, once again, thank you for being on Aging Today. It's a delight to have you on, and let's do it again in the future. Do you have another book that's on the back burner?
Well, not right now. I do have some thoughts rumbling around, but not yet close enough to a book form. But in the future, there will be, I'm sure. So thank you. But in the event that anybody wants to follow along on Facebook, they can go to Aging and Faith, Missy Buchanan, and follow along on Facebook, because I post there every day. So I'd be glad to have them join.
Fantastic. Missy, have a great day. Thank you for sharing with all of us. here at Aging Today, and we're delighted that we have that friendship, we have that relationship with you. You've got a great story. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right, and this is Mark Turnbull, your host, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Aging Today. As a reminder, we are the podcast where together we're experiencing the many options to aging on your terms. Join us every Monday when we release a new conversation on Aging Today to your favorite podcast channel. And remember this, we're all in the process of aging, and as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. So young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.